Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
We had a big batch of semiconductor news today. I'm looking at the stocks. There are 30 names. 28 were higher in today's session, 2 lower. NVIDIA was up about 13%. ASML was up about 9%. I mean, we had everything, some good, some bad, and then some more good news, Tim.
It's good/bad depending on what audience you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're an Intel employee whose job is
Not
getting
so
cut,
good.
that's not good news. But if you're an investor looking for cost cuts, then that is good news. AMD's quarterly beat, bullish forecast, and upbeat analyst commentary around its AI accelerator. And then did you say talk about ASML?
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, even Intel was up 2% today, but that unfortunately sometimes happens when you announce job cuts.
NVIDIA as well. Okay, so a lot in the semi space. Let's get to it with the co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, Ed Ludlow. He's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Of all the chip stories that have broken in the last 24 hours, Ed, which one is the most important one for our audience to pay attention to?
We should put out, we had ARM Holding after the close. We had Qualcomm after the close.
I don't really know where to start. I mean, let's start probably with AMD because I think there's probably the most read across to everyone else. It's probably easier. And AMD is a very distant second player in the market for AI accelerators. And it basically makes the same thing that NVIDIA does, a high performance GPU to train AI models. And the single data point is they thought they'd sell $4 billion worth of them this year. Now they're saying $4.5 billion. So there are two ways of looking at it. Either they're chipping away at a market where NVIDIA absolutely dominates and might do $100 billion. And good for them, and good for NVIDIA.
And just remember the difference, 4.5 versus 100 billion.
Right, or you extrapolate out and say,
Yeah.
what does this tell us about the broader environment, the so-called investment cycle? The commentary from AMD was very bullish that all of the money being spent on these GPUs that go into data centers is going to continue for some time. The gain in NVIDIA, which we can talk about, is historic. It's a big moment in our careers, actually. You know, covering equity markets, let alone technology. Mm-hmm. But I think a big part of that was the read-through from AMD, as well as I think you probably saw the Morgan Stanley note.
Yeah.
That
Absolutely.
NVIDIA is the top pick in there.
Regaining it
yes,
again.
regaining it, exactly.
Did it also help, though, that Microsoft, who has a very special relationship with NVIDIA,
Yes.
in terms of buying chips and so on and so forth, like that they were talking about increasing CapEx, right? And NVIDIA benefits.
Long story short, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I don't know if we're going to talk about Meta, but
Wherever you want to go.
Well, so Meta, we can get into their numbers. They once again raised the range for their guidance to CapEx.
Yeah.
When I cover technology earnings, I always go back and look what happened the prior quarter. Meta raised its CapEx guidance last quarter, and what happened the next day? The stock fell by 16%.
Yeah.
Because everyone was like, hold on, Mark Zuckerberg, you can't spend that much on chips. But the other thing that happened in the after-hours session in that moment, April 24th, was NVIDIA jumped. Of course it did, because that's where the money goes. So that's how you join the dots here. And once again, Meta has actually just raised the bottom of that guided range, minimum $37 billion to $40 billion. That's where the money goes.
But can we stay with Meta for a second?
Please, yeah.
Sorry, is it just that it did do okay? I think it's still trading higher in the aftermarket. It's up about 4.5%. But because the last quarter they beat, and so are they showing that these investments are paying off? Or I don't know. We'll see if we get some color in the aftermarket.
Yes, very simply put, you go to their forecast for sales for the current period, right, which is $38.5 to $41 billion. So even at the midpoint, that's pretty good against where the street was looking. I think the consensus was 39.2.
Right.
The point is, with Meta, it's probably a little bit easier to see where the investment in AI helps, and that is simply that it makes their advertising more valuable. You know, that's where the money's to be made. They're not necessarily selling a generative AI product, but they've maintained a story where they're like, we're doing a lot of work with AI, and what we think it will do is just make the ads we place against our existing technologies better, command a higher price. Well, that's evidenced in the forecast for their sales, pretty much.
Sorry if you were looking for a personal assistant that would do the dishes, because you're just getting better targeted ads, Carol.
One day.
One day. I want to go back to AMD because you had a big interview with Lisa Su, the chairpresident and CEO of AMD, a little earlier. You mentioned the environment. It's something that she talked about in that interview.
We're seeing an environment where everybody needs more data center AI infrastructure. You know, computing is really the foundation of what drives, sort of all of these AI capabilities going forward.
That's Lisa Su, the AMD chair president and CEO. What did you want to get out of that interview, and what did you take away, Ed?
So Lisa, Su, and AMD, we set the stage right. They're a distant second player where they have $4.5 billion of sales for their amazing AI chips, and Nvidia has 100 billion. But to her credit, they have been consistent that they're supply constrained. In other words, if they're the manufacturers that make their chips, TSMC, made more for them, their revenue would be much better. So they've been consistent, and you give them some credit for that. I think the thing that Lisa does very well is that was quite abstract, what she said. It was quite big picture. The environment, everyone's spending on infrastructure. What she means by that is people are still building data centers. Well, we know that. Microsoft told us last night.
Right.
But she also gave specific examples of how their AI accelerators being used. She used the example of Microsoft. And she said that, she gave names of specific projects Microsoft was working on where they're using their MI300X and I guess not using NVIDIA's technology. So it's just convincing, I guess, at this stage.
Yeah. Okay. Intel. Stock was up about 2%. They have some convincing to do, although investors seem to like the idea of job cuts, and they're still trying to figure their way forward. I don't know. How do we think about Intel and the news today? I feel like Pat Gelsinger has been working on it for a while.
Okay, so there are basically two battlegrounds for Intel on the product side. They are data centers and they are PCs. And historically, Intel is the absolute leader in PCs, right? Intel Inside.
Right.
I grew up with that.
Dun, dun, dun.
Earnings have really suffered and languished behind those peers. AMD and NVIDIA are making gains in the market for AI accelerators that go into data centers and also CPUs, which Intel's good at. Intel might do $500 million this year in AI accelerator sales. It doesn't really register against NVIDIA. And at the same time, there's an important data point in the Bloomberg story. So sources say thousands of layoffs are coming. That's a lot. But remember, Intel has 110,000 employees around the world. I'll pull up AMD just real quick to give you a comparison. But they have something that most US chip makers don't have. They're not actually chip makers. Intel is. It has a foundry and a fab business where it wants to become...
AMD has about 26,000.
Right.
Big difference.
And that accounts for the difference, right?
Yeah.
And Intel's been through layoffs before, but they have all this money coming in from the US government and the CHIPS Act. They're trying to be a contract manufacturer, and they're struggling to keep up with all of this, and often being prudent helps.
Ed, 10 seconds
Sorry,
on Amazon tomorrow.
AI will be the story, but look at the advertising business. It's pretty much the fastest growing ad business out there. Always surprises.
Have you subscribed to the ad-free version of Prime Video yet?
I have not. I'm very comfortable with ads, although when Rings of Power comes around, I'm so stoked. Maybe. We'll see.
All right, there it is. That's what you got to look for.
Just depends what you're watching. Ed Ludlow, thank you so much. So fun to have you here on the East Coast. Co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television. Catch them at 11 a.m. Wall Street time, Monday through Friday.